Good day and welcome to this hour of Cyber Power of Tigrayan. Again, good day to you. My name is Helena Taddese. I am here. It's a pleasure to be joined by Mr. Gide Maza. Gide, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Helena, for having me.
Thank you so much for honoring us with your time and joining us for this hour. To all our viewers, we thank you so much for joining. And as more of you join us, we say welcome back. It has been a little bit longer than I'd like it to have been since our last wellness in time of crisis. And please understand that is because I've been heavily involved in policy and advocacy on all fronts, like most of us. Sometimes you see certain parts are needing your attention, and I'm so happy that just within the diaspora, within our community, so many people have continued with attention to mental health within our community as this genocide towards the Tigrayan people unfortunately continues, and so many um, facets of this call to action for the international community continues. Most of us are aware of the different dynamic, right? There is the online advocacy, there is the calling your senators, your Congress officials, your mayors, there's the fundraising. So if you are right now taking the moment to be here with us, we thank you so much for honoring yourself, because if we don't come out of this with our mental health intact or very much paid attention to, then we don't come out of this as whole as we can be in order to continue the rebuild, in order to just wrap our arms around those who need us the most, which are the people that are facing these atrocities firsthand. So before I continue today's program, I would love to give Brother Gide a moment to introduce yourself, please.
My name is Gide Maza. I'm a Fresno resident by way of Chicago, by way of Ethiopia. Very specifically, I'm a '80s baby, and I know what it feels like to come out of the '80s when this almost 40 some odd years ago, similar, almost identical thing was happening. Um, I'm the oldest of six siblings. We're spread out throughout California. Uh, my sister Saba is on the HPN group panel, kind of a little bit of everything. I come here as a licensed marriage family therapist, so short for what we call a LMFT. I've been in private practice with myself now for 2 years, but I've been in the mental health field, like various levels of it, with youth and families for the last 15 years of my career. And a lot of that being out of Fresno, which is, people ask me, Helena, a lot, like, where is Fresno in California? We're the middle of the state, if you can think about that. So we're 2.5, almost 3 hours south of the Bay Area, Oakland, San Francisco, and another 3 hours going back south to LA. And this region is really interesting. It's a lot of farmland, which is very similar to like our regions in Tigray. So, people ask me like, well, why did your parents out of all the cities that we're in throughout the nation come to Fresno? And it's because the land and the terrain is very, very similar to us. And, I think you and I would agree our people are very, we feel safe when things are familiar to us. Um, and we go where it's very familiar. So I'm here in Fresno.
Thank you so much for that. I know there are Fresno people watching. Most definitely thankful for that, shout out, big up to Fresno. I've
Yeah,
actually visited my family there. You're right. The layout of the area, and it's also very heavily populated with Tigrayans. I would say, at least a lot of my family's there, so it feels like it's a lot of
absolutely.
Tigrayans. Yeah,
Yep. Absolutely.
nice land. Um, Do you find that there are major differences in your day-to-day clients and those and your interactions with Tigrayan community members? And because we're in HPN together, I know probably more than ever in your life, you are um, communicating more so with community members. And I wonder for people who might wonder, are there vast differences, or are you finding, as I'm sure it must be true that we're all the same as a people, no matter what we're going through?
I think you answered the question. I think it's the latter half. Um, our experiences individually and as Tigrayans, um, compared to like the global community and even here our local community, is different. But what I consistently find, like, the more and more I really dive into people's mental health, is that how we feel about our experiences is identical. So the emotions are across the board the same.
That makes so much sense to me. So, in that spirit, I like to kick off each conversation reminding ourselves, reminding our viewers the key terminologies, especially with what's going on now with the crisis. Um, let's talk about trauma. Let's talk about triggers. What are they? What will they look like within our community today?
Mhm. Mhm. So you are we defining trauma, like what my
Yeah. What
definition
is
is
your,
and my
yeah,
experience of trauma? Yeah.
exactly. What is trauma? Because we use these words a lot now.
Yep.
Thankfully, we're paying a lot of attention to our mental health and that of our greater community and that of our people that are within the conflict zones right now. But to you and your informed definition, what is trauma? What are triggers? And what will they look like specifically within our community?
Yeah, there's a bunch of layers to peel back there. I want to be clear too. For me, there's research based definitions, which I think we all are very, and oftentimes, if we're not, we have access to it through technology. So the spaces that I speak from understand research. However, I come from like a very real human world experience of, outside of research, what is trauma. So there's research again, and there's my definition, and then there's really the definitions of the people that I see day to day, right? Which live on trauma spectrums. You and I do different variants of it. So if I were, as I'm defining trauma for myself and just my experience, it's a normal, and I know folks are going to say, oh my gosh, what's normal about trauma? But the key for me is that it is a normal response, mind, body, soul response that really hardens us. And I want to be clear, psychologically, but also physically. It hardens us. It literally freezes us, and our ability to grow. And the way I like to paint it is, trauma for me, and really what I hear from my clients, again, day to day, is that it's what happens to them. It's what happens to me on the outside, right? The inside gets rattled and shaken, and then the outside physically reacts to that. And I hope we have some time to really dive into how trauma from the inside outside, how it literally manifests itself physically. And when I say that, I'm talking about, even for our people, when we talk about our stomachs hurt, that's a trauma response to freezing. um, our challenges to sleep, right? Undersleep, oversleep, weight gain, weight loss. Um, for our HPN doctors out there, they know this too. But our increase in blood pressure, right? The hyper blood pressure, and then also like hypo blood pressure, right? The dropping of blood pressure, um, neck problems, back problems, all of that stuff. And again, all from a base of, when we freeze, our emotions freeze. whatever they may be, but they find a way out. And oftentimes it's physically finding ways to come out of us. So I hope that's kind of my like long
No, most definitely.
definition.
Yeah, I heard you say the mind informs the body and the body informs the mind. That's
Hmm.
what, right. And so
Hmm.
whether we are dealing with what's mentally happening to us, it transpires through the body, and whether we see it as such or not. And more than likely, our ailments have to do unresolved issues, most likely from trauma that's happening now,
Hmm.
like the genocide,
Hmm.
like the worrying about where are our family members, or not being able to bury them, or the hunger, the famine, or whatever we're trying to handle. That's what I'm hearing you say, while we're trying to advocate. Because I think also those people who are, really hard in the paint, so to speak, of advocacy, may not see, because you're busy doing whatever that looks like to you, whatever type of advocacy you're in,
Right.
within your church groups, within your community, within your own families, advocating for, um, to be able to move forward while this is happening, while you're processing it. What I'm hearing you say is that it shows up, mind and body, body mind connection. Is that right? Is that
And
right? Pretty much.
no, absolutely. And I think for the sake of us understanding what that looks like, oftentimes it looks physical. For our kids, physical means they act out somehow, some way, right? There's a behavior that's connected to it, which really is, for me, it's a signal of like something is going on, and that we're doing our best to get it out.
I never thought about it like that before.
Hmm.
Just like our kids will act out because they don't have the words, they don't have the tools. Perhaps some of us also act out, and could be, I think, like you mentioned, some of the versions, human beings can try to deal with trauma is, a lot of people just think, not having an appetite, but you're right, also um, eating more than you usually do. Some
Hmm.
people don't sleep well, but some people oversleep.
Hmm.
And if you were consuming alcohol before, maybe you're over consuming now,
Hmm.
in order to numb it. So that could be also a way adults act up to ourselves in our own lives. That's a really
Yeah.
good point there. In terms of triggers, let's define triggers so that we can move forward in this conversation, remembering what these are as we continue to talk about them.
Yeah. For me, triggers tend to be this idea where our brain says we need to um, we need to fight, whether it's physical or emotional. We need to run, and we know what that is. Literally get up and get out, be displaced, similar to what we're seeing between, you know, our borders between Sudan and Ethiopia, right? And then, well, I said it. So freeze. That's the other part. We literally stop, drop, and freeze because we're so overloaded emotionally, and our what I call like our back brain or our primitive brain says stop, right? So we biologically stop. Our breathing slows down. Our heart rate either increases or decreases, but it freezes. Um, all from a space of, and I want to be clear because this is hard, I think, for people to understand. Like, oh my gosh, you have to freeze or um, take flight somehow, some way, or fight. Yeah, because the brain, and I want to be very clear about this too for our people, is our brain's number one job is to survive. It doesn't matter, nor does it differentiate between a good day in survival, the everyday things, or an extreme situation that we're placed in. Um, it says that we are going to live or we're going to die in the situation. It doesn't differentiate, and it does this. for me, very appropriately, right? Because we do have to survive no matter what the situation is. Um, and survive from a place of, has safety been addressed or will safety be addressed? And until safety is addressed, it's really, really hard outside of, and I know we'll talk about this down the road here, but it's really, really hard um, to address coping skills, for example. If our brain is saying, are we safe? Do I have a home? Where is my home? How do I create a home? Do I have food? Do I have, a family member or my siblings with me? What's going on with my family? So that's how I look at this idea of triggers, that really they're responses to what's going on.
So something reminds you of the trauma, past or present,
Hmm.
and you're having sort of a visceral reaction within your body, within your mind cannot differentiate whether you're out on that battlefield or you're safely at home. You're having the same sort of reactions. Maybe you're sweating, maybe you're hyperventilating, maybe you're not breathing.
Hmm.
And I'm hearing you say it comes in different levels. So maybe it's not that extreme where you're able to see it, but for sure, many a times I've, after the fact, when somebody says, take a deep breath, for instance, I realize either I was breathing very shallowly or maybe was not breathing at all, which sounds almost ridiculous because breathing is a non-voluntary, and an involuntary reaction,
Yep.
or it's a muscle or a way of being, but you only realize it when somebody says take a deep breath or somebody says slow down. So needless to say, being in these conversations, especially within a community that is either sharing the same situation, has shared the same history, um, Tigrayan or outside of the Tigray community, is so important.
Hmm.
So today we're focusing on the conversations we can be having, we should be having, in order to make it through this time, so that we're not just barely getting out of it. And we're noticing, unfortunately, there are so many of us within the Tigrayan diaspora that are suffering, either silently
Yep.
or out loud. We've lost people um, due to suicide, and it's very sad because they're 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 disconnected, right? Disconnected.
Absolutely.
I think about suffering and how COVID specifically has forced our community to really be in disconnect, and how that's part of the suffering. Um, we're noticing recently there are many people who have had major losses within their family, not
Hmm.
just due to the crisis, but due to COVID here in the States and abroad. Can you speak to those parallels to the loss due to this crisis and these atrocities, these heinous crimes that are being perpetrated and leading to the loss, and then being here, seeing the people and having those type of losses, and how people who may not be in healthy conversations, mental health conversations, may be drowning in this?
Yeah. And I want to back up a little bit too, and understand that, the, the way I see loss, the way I see grief, like encompassed within trauma, also means that um, we live on this extreme where, you use the word disconnected. That's one extreme, but I've also seen it to where we've been completely connected to the experience and to the loss, and neither of those sides are healthy. You know what I mean? So I always try to remind our people, and just even the folks that I work with, is how do we bring you back to some sort of regulated, balanced middle, because neither of those sides are beneficial. And when we go to those sides, it's because our brain is telling us we're going to die. You know. So there's an overload component here, but I think there's something real about being connected completely and also significantly being disconnected, which is tricky because, we as people, one of the number one coping skills that we have is we're a people of like connection, whether it's talking, connection, physical connection, and I would even say like symbolic connection, you know, people, places, and things in Tigray, right? Like everything from the history of Aksum, Gondor, I like parts of Shire. Like there's a symbolic connection there too. So I just want to make sure that, for the audience, I expand like my definition. Um, and I hope that's helpful. So
It really is, because you're right. We're so finely connected now within the trauma, whereas that connection in the past served us to heal and to celebrate and to to have these collaborative sort of things going on. It's now almost turned against us, but only because perhaps we're not we're so much in the depth of trauma that we
yeah.
haven't realized that we can come back to that wholeness.
And that it is okay in extreme traumas, Helena, and I try to remind us of this, in extreme traumas, to understand that our responses are normal. We're supposed to stop, freeze, and fight. We're supposed to, because on a basic level, if the simple basic things, the shelter, the food, the warmth, all the stuff that our brain in the back, from long ago needs in order to be available for everything else, um, has to it has to be triggered. So I want the audience to understand what we're going through collectively. This grief and loss idea. It's normal. It's what are we going to do to recover, and what are we doing to recover slowly and come back to a balance, I think one of the silent killers that happens, and I promise I'll get to loss and grief, but I want to go here in our community, is
Yeah.
that we believe we have to keep what's happening a secret. um, and again, part of our how we're built in our DNA is to be very private, protective, people, whether it's the larger community or our families. And what I say now is we don't have time for that, because whether we live here in the States or somewhere abroad, or we're losing family right now in Tigray, we can't be hoarding this like hurt. We can't hide this hurt. It's happening, and we need to be able to speak it out, because once we speak it out, once we put words to it, number one, oftentimes we find out that we're not alone, even though we know, but we find out that we're not alone, and then that decreases the chemicals in our brain, right? The stress chemicals a little bit. And then we find out that look what everybody is doing collectively. Um, so, when I think of grief and loss, but even just the quote unquote coping skills, they're not any different than what we do in good times, y- you know, which means how do we grieve when we've lost somebody in our community, right? It doesn't have to be this huge funeral, right? And then staying days at a time at someone's home, because that may not be possible, but we know how to grieve. So, how do we grieve in a way that's flexible, that will still meet our needs and be okay to protect ourselves? I hope that makes sense. So, what I'm going to throw out is we don't need to do anything differently than just back up a little bit and say, how can we grieve the way we've been used to grieving? If it can't be physical, as hard as it may be, can it be online somehow, some way?
So
Can it be on a phone?
separate. I'm sorry. So,
No, you're fine.
just to make sure I'm hearing you say, how do we continue to stay connected, even though there's so many obstacles currently? Again, I think about COVID, and though we're slowly getting out of that, it feels like more than ever we're starting to see sort of as things slowly to open up, we're starting to see the ramifications of early COVID days. We're starting to see in person with our eyes the effect that it's had on certain people within our community, whether it be their family structure or their um, mental health. Because before, maybe a phone call, and you couldn't really understand the totality of how this was affecting certain people within the community. But now, as things are slowly starting to open up, and then I think about months ago, we were doing online funerals.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we're doing in person funerals. And so I have to imagine that there's compounded grief.
Absolutely.
And as we cry for the person for whom we're attending, I think being human means that, you know, everything that's backed up in you just starts to come out. And,
Yep.
maybe you're grieving on so many different levels. But I do hear you saying that grieving, letting it out is important. We don't necessarily have to do anything new, but just letting it out in whatever way that it needs to be let out. Is that right?
Absolutely. And then even before that, coming to a place and coming to an understanding of what you had to do, what we've had to do is okay given the circumstances. There's something about giving ourselves permission and doing away with like negative ideas and judgments of how dare we do it this way. So backing up and being able to say, you know what, I have permission to understand that I've gone through this like horrific thing, and that we as people right now are going through one of the most horrific things, like monsters that is even imaginable, like in history. We're in a genocide, right? People's literal bodies, um, whether it's men, women, or children, are being taken, are being abused. Um, we're being forced and displaced um, physically from our land. That does something to people, let alone us as people that are connected to our land. Um, to be able to like literally give yourself permission to say I'm doing the best that I can do, and that this is a normal response, and then taking it a step further and being able to say we're a connected people to each other. So how do we continue to stay um, connected, you know, and let out what we need to let out. And then everything after that, I feel like is manageable, because the other part of trauma is once you've experienced it, and I hate to use this kind of language, but once you experience some kind of trauma, it never leaves you. So then the conversation comes to how do we maintain our trauma but continue to move forward?
So the now and the later part, being well informed now so that we can continue on for later.
Yeah, yeah. A collective like holding of our breath, our mind, our body, and understanding that like it's okay to hold what's happening right now, um, whatever that means for the future, but literally right now and in this present moment. And again, giving ourselves credit for we're doing the best that we can do.
Hmm. That the idea of giving ourselves grace that we would extend to others outside of ourselves.
Hmm.
Um, I think we're still harnessing that within our community. Earlier, you said something. You've been saying important things, the whole almost 20 something minutes, but I latched on specifically to this one. Um, the different norms within our community. And it's not that we're so this way or that way within our community, but every community is different. And for us, like you said, we're so used to keeping these secrets within our families, keeping secrets within our communities. And of course, I'm sure it has to do with our past. Um, Being a minority, it does something to you. It informs cultural norms. And now, when we need to be open the most, we're having to really move quickly to
Yeah.
do what we know we must in order for the good of the community. And I really have to commend our Tigrayan community because it just, I mean, you have to admit, we've come so far in such a
Mhm.
short time. And nobody is naive enough to say we don't have,
Yeah.
further to go. But I don't think we give ourselves as a community enough credit that, right? I mean, the
Absolutely.
attention to mental health, the attention to, um, just uh, rights across the sexes. I mean, the attention to things that people who would wish us ill, so to
Mm.
speak, would try to. I don't really want to. I don't want to give energy to that, but
Right.
it has to be said because who are we kidding? But we've
Here's the
come
thing,
so
Helene.
far, right?
No, we have, and I want to be mindful that um, politics doesn't have to be a part of socioeconomic or whatever we want to call it. Politics does not have to be a part of the conversation um, around people are hurting,
Absolutely,
right? Like, so what I'm big on, even in my practice with whether it's our folks or it's just my clients, what I'm big on is you can't begin to heal what you're not willing for many reasons, because resistance is a very real thing. It hurts, but you can't heal what you're not willing to reveal. And I'm very adamant about that with my clients. And once we get to that understanding, this whole dark world that my clients have been holding for long periods of time, all of a sudden it starts to just relieve itself little by little, you know and from there we jump into, well, now how are you, you know so we have to be able to put words to our experiences historically, um, and in the present and for the future. That's a part of our real life experience, so we have to be okay going there regardless of what the politics are.
absolutely. And so that means, as we've become very comfortable in our advocacy, saying why it's not okay that the
Mhm.
crimes are being perpetrated against our people, we have to continue to strive to be able to say why it's not. I'm not okay. I'm not okay right now, and that's okay.
Yep. 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 And then that cut opens up, and of course it'll hurt because a lot comes with having to admit, or put light to something, because there's an adjustment period that's there, and there's an adjustment period for pain. But what I continue, I think, to experience with folks is that wound or that trauma gets better when it's aired out, when it's literally, it has words that live outside of our bodies. Um, because again, the easy thing about trauma, the first things that we see are physical signs. That's easy. We're seeing physical signs of trauma right now, um, in Tigray. We're allowed to call those out, so that they have air and space, and they're not trapped in our bodies trying to figure out how to get out. And oftentimes, when we're trying to figure out how to get that trauma out, it doesn't come out in the best ways. It almost always, like for our men, it almost always comes out in physical violence, verbal violence, on the outside. And for our men, when we internalize it, it comes out in physical symptoms, right? And the same goes, I think, not to generalize, but it's the same theme for our women, who, by the way, like more than us as men, I can say this very proudly, hold a lot of physical and emotional pain for us.
Before we continue on, and I do want to
Hmm.
touch on that. It's very important. You
Hmm.
said, call it what it is. It's important for us to give it name, to let it breathe. So
Yeah.
let's call it, for the sake of the people that are watching, for my sake and for your sake. Let's just call out what it is that is causing our community trauma right now. I'll start. The mass rapes of our women and young girls, and the boys that have not even felt it's okay to speak about it.
The one that I'll call out, because I'm, a large part of my work is with children, 5 and above, is the intentional starvation that's happening. This isn't accidental, but the intentional starvation that's happening um, to our children back home.
The people that once lived alongside our community members within Tigray, and even those of us here in the diaspora that felt like on a dime just
Mm.
disappeared or are actively disavowing and that our trauma, and that really hurts.
I'd like to call out, um, since we're people of our land, you know, we walk barefooted, and then can touch and feel and be with the land. I'm calling out the intentional taking, and occupation and looting and also raping of our land.
I feel compelled to call out the use of religious,
Mm.
spiritual symbols like the cross over massacred bodies, and that trauma that converges,
Mm.
something that's very sacred to you, and almost trying to take away yet another facet of life, which is our connection to God Himself.
And Helena, I appreciate that you're doing this, because this now gives opportunity for our folks who are watching live to also be able, to call out the things that you and I are missing, whether they're deep, intimate things that are personal to the family back home and here, or you're here in the States. I think I'd like, if it's okay, just to take a few minutes to allow that.
I'd like to do that with you very much. I'm seeing some of the comments,
Yeah.
and the anger is very palpable. So if anything comes to your mind, please write down in the comments. I definitely will share with Gide and everyone else. Right now, we're just calling out the types of traumas or traumatic events or experiences that this crisis, that this genocide has filled us with, has made us go through, whatever it is that we are experiencing. Gide, I can't let this conversation continue without really probing you, because
Mm.
we have such a gift in you
Mm,
that I noticed within your bio that you do focus on men's well-being specifically. I have yet to meet a guest who had that in their repertoire, in their
mm,
experience. And although within our conversations here at Wellness in Time of Crisis, we're talking about the community as a whole, and men and women and children, I really want to ask you specifically, what are our men going through? Understanding the role that they're used to playing within our communities and who they say they are and who our community says they are. At a time like this, what are our men going through?
that's such a complex and like loaded question, but if I were to answer that from my space and just what I hear in general, you know, on top of the list is this resetting of who we are as men. Um, the old ways of this is how we used to do it um, are still very real, but they're also fading away in a world that we live in. So we're experiencing this like identity crisis. I think that's the big one, and that has a whole bunch to it. But if we're keeping it simple, I identity crisis is happening. Um, I, I think the idea that our roles as men to only be, for example, protectors and providers and very stoic, that idea is starting to fade away. Um, because what I'm hearing and seeing is that we're either hurting ourselves from the inside out, or it's again goes back to this manifestation piece, or it's physically coming out. You mentioned suicide. I'm not saying that suicide isn't at an all-time rate, but we're hearing more and more of our like physical loss of our men. Um, just a confusion and a resetting of our identities. I think that again, keeping it simple is what I'm hearing is happening. Um, and by the way, that is okay too. I want to put that out there to our men maybe that are watching, that's okay, because if we can process that, if we can learn how to maintain our identity as men, we can be more available and actually in very healthy ways for our families.
To be
Um,
clear, today you're saying that you're hearing that more men are going through identity crisis due to this crisis, this
Absolutely.
genocide, and that's okay because it's sort of the evolution that, right? That's what you're saying is okay. Is
Yeah, and that the reset is okay, because in that reset, if we can be truthful, if we can put words to what's happening to us, which by the way, our kids, our women know this innately, anyways. It won't be a surprise. What will be a surprise is when we can speak it and be able to say it. So yeah, that this reset that's happening from old to again down the road here, new is okay. Um, the word for me, evolution, is tricky. However, yeah, it's a level of the evolution that is happening here.
yeah, it brings to mind more of that grace we were talking about, allowing the natural change, the natural evolution to happen. I want to take a second here. From our request, there have been some
Hmm.
people writing, and thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for joining us on this hour. Couldn't help but see Ahaya says something that comes up is that within the refugee camps that the survivors are, where we would feel, thank God, they've reached this place of safety, that unfortunately they too are dying of starvation and malnutrition. So we join you in that, and I don't want to minimize whatsoever your hurt and your pain. I just want to remind us also, it's hard, but we also have to um, keep sight of how these things are happening within the camps, because
Mm.
a lot of times the news stacks up one after the other on top of each other, and it's easy to it's easy to forget that some of the statistics that are coming out of the camps are of people who got there too late, unfortunately, who were
Mhm.
trapped in between the borders, because we know that the Ethiopian federal government's troops were for a long time stopping people from entering to safe havens, to these refugee camps. So a lot of our people were stuck in between. And so this brother who's displaced, who might have reached the camp too late. So, and I think as we're grieving for these individual stories, and that it's really important that we stay grounded and try to understand, because it can cause you, like it has caused me in the past, this all-out panic.
Mm.
Early on, there was the story of a young man who was accidentally the arm amputated, and this happened, and within the camps, and I was so horrified. I actually was having major nightmares and panic attacks, and then I realized, with HPN, Health Professional Network, for Tigray, uh, the organization that Gide and I both belong to, I realized we had resources. And so I called and started to dig around with our doctor on the ground within the refugee camp. And after about 3 weeks of asking one of our doctors, and he went to the other doctor, and he went to the actual NGO that helped treat this young man, what we found out was the reporting was incorrect, that there wasn't someone who purposely did this to the young man, but that the reporting was wrong. And I was able to bring back
Mm.
the truth to certain communities that had, where I heard the story from. But by then, this wildfire of misinformation, right?
Yeah.
Not disinformation, because nobody did it on purpose,
Yeah.
but people were misinformed. And it had caused such panic within our community that it added to the trauma, that nobody of Tigrayan descent is safe anywhere. So while we join you in that grief for our brother who didn't make it, I want to just remind us that it's important. Reach out to us. Reach out to the organizations that have people on the ground and that can speak to this. And I'll be very happy to join Gide in getting you this information about. You mentioned the brother from afar who died of malnutrition, and I do wonder if he just gotten to the refugee camp a little too late. Also, we have a little bit before that mentioned the grief of keeping all this grief to ourselves,
Mm.
and hopefully doesn't last forever. Yene Gabre mentioned that. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Absolutely, I think we share that with you as well. Um, Children also dying in the camps due to starvation and malnutrition.
Mm.
Absolutely, we join you in that concern, Sahai, and we join you in that concern as we continue to hold these NGOs outside of the diaspora. Um, we continue to hold them accountable. Um, and again, I don't want you to feel like I'm telling you you shouldn't feel this way, but I do want to address whatever we are able to address from our organization, and that is, there are people who care about this very much. We have doctors who have continuously gone to the camps and are bringing assessments, and there are also other organizations who join HPN for Tigray in holding UNHCR accountable, UNICEF. What are our children doing? you said you were going to be doing this. Why aren't you doing this? What are you doing? So we want you to know that you don't have to be in a dark somewhere, um, crying about these things that you're hearing about, that there are organizations within the diaspora who are speaking for you and for me and for our people. And then Ermias says, it hurts us all emotionally. It's good to share feelings to one another. Absolutely. Thank you,
Right.
Ermias. Um,
And oftentimes that's a hard. And I'm glad Adam asked is bringing that up. So, like,
that's right.
let me back up. Oftentimes that's actually enough, but the outside, the physical side of this that wants us to do something, that's where the challenge is, you know. And I think, Helena, you've done a good job of covering this. On the outside, we have HPN as a network holding systems accountable, you know. So as much as we want to look inside, and I think spot on, Ermias is right. It's okay to feel. Let's not lose sight of what's happening on the outside as well for us within systems work. It's a combination of both that'll get us through this period.
Absolutely. Agreed. I want to touch on possible negative self talk that survivors, and I say survivors, you and me, not being there in Tigray, we're survivors. Um, those of us who have gone through either the 80s version of this, the famine, and I know my family and I,
Mm.
we did that walk from Ethiopia to Sudan
Yep.
and then waited for our green cards.
Yep.
I know a lot of people share that story. I think about people who were even born within the refugee camps that are by our sides right now in advocacy. I think about some of our community members whose second, third, fourth famine or attack on our Tigrayan people this is. I think about people who've never even been to the country but identify because their families are either Tigrayan or of a different minority group who are triggered by this. We are all considered survivors. And as such, I know we have that thing called survivor's guilt. Why can I feed my child and they can't? Why can I turn on the lights and they can't? Why can I, all of these whys. So, what are some negative self talk that survivors, because I really want people to hear their self talk out loud, because there's so many of us who don't even realize there is such a thing happening within our minds that breaks down our mind and our bodies. So,
Yep.
what are some of these self talks, negative self talks that you've come across from your clients, from friends and family, noticed in yourself even?
I would also say this: positive self-talk that is covered, but is actually negative self-talk.
Uh
Uh,
huh. Okay, let's hear it.
so I want to reverse a little bit though, and kind of put this on the audience as well, and on you as well, Elena, is if we believe or agree that trauma is this like normal response to a very extreme situation, um, what purpose does negative self-talk have in the situation?
Oh, well, I like where that's going. Can we give examples of the self talk so that we can
Yeah.
answer the question? And
um,
also, let's invite the audience. You're right. I'll take your lead. Please put in the box some of the self talk you've heard, you've noticed within your own mind.
I'll put the biggest one out there, and I think it's survivor's guilt. Is especially for us here in the States. Why me is a huge one. Why am I not there holding and taking on um, my family and my country's pain. Um, Here's a positive one. How did I get so lucky to be here and my dad isn't here? My brother, my sister isn't here. Um, what am I worth? Because I'm here and they're over there. Um, Gosh, there's so many.
Here's one a lot of people will definitely identify with. Hi, you said it.
Mm,
Why can't I be the voice for my people because Twitter has suspended my account?
mm.
Oh boy, there's a lot of people who can identify with that for sure. Sense of powerless says peace for all. Sense of powerlessness sometimes that I'm sure brings up all sorts of negative self talk. So, okay, tell us what you meant by the positive negative.
Our brain has this really, really tricky thing that it does in survival mode, where in order for us to survive, um, we'll paint whether it's this idea of, like I said, positive self-talk that's actually a cover for negative talk. Um, it does this really good job of providing an explanation and maybe even an excuse. So I would put out there to folks, and I know that this is hard because it means that we have to be like, um, what was the word you used, Helena? Um, visceral with our truth. That sometimes, like, it's okay to sit back and literally sit in your negative self talk and don't rush into this idea of I need to be positive. Um, I think in a very loving way, we're very, and this is global, I think, very hospitable people. Um, Very, very, we don't want to show the negative or even the thought of negative to the outside. And that gets tricky because then it becomes a cover. Like, I need to be positive, but I know I'm not feeling positive. Right. So it's that I did like, we need to start pulling that veil away from there and being able to say, hey, just like anybody else, and especially in a time like this, of course you have some negative self thoughts, and to remember that thoughts are thoughts. When actions combine with thoughts, then we have a different discussion. But that we don't have to cover the negative in positive. We can sit in it. I hope that makes sense, and especially to the audience.
It really does. You're right in that even I notice when loved ones call and ask me, how are you doing?
Yep.
I feel so inauthentic. I feel like a liar when I say, oh, great. I'm great. I'm not great. I'm nowhere near great. I'm
Hmm.
trying not to drown. I think I told you this today in all of the stuff that I have chosen to
Yeah.
to do, along with what is already part of life. And so I've started to say, as good as can be under their circumstances, it feels less like a lie to the people that I don't know firsthand. But to my loved ones, I say, I'm not great. And that's okay. I
Yep.
really do say, I do say that so that they know I don't need to sit for a session or I don't need to unpack anything right now. Although, um, what helps me and that I just keep going to as many of our communities as possible
Hmm.
to ask you to please find some sort of group conversation that you can join. Because honestly, even if you don't say a word, that whole hour or half hour,
Yep.
hearing other people, you feel like somebody has spoken your truth already.
Hmm.
And what I hear you saying today is allowing yourself to even maybe sit with the not being okay. Just actually sit without trying to convert yourself thinking I need to be positive. You know, I people even feel like they don't have the right
Right.
to feel sad or bad because they're not under the airstrikes or they're not under the famine. But I think what we're saying is our family that is on the ground in Tigray has every right to feel what they're feeling, just as you within the diaspora have every right to feel what you're feeling. And no amount of advocacy,
Hmm.
no amount of whatever it is that you're trying to do will be as good as it can be if you're not taking care of yourself. So for
Absolutely.
the people who are hardcore like that, I try to come at it from the point of advocacy. There's some of us who don't want to hear about well-being if it doesn't have, who don't want to hear anything about anything if it doesn't have to do with what am I doing today and tomorrow for my people. And totally we understand that.
Yep.
And I'm here having this conversation, but secretly out loud, I'm one of those people.
Yep.
But I've also surrendered to the fact that day in, day out, what I was doing was not working because I was not at my at my top form. In fact, as a first-time mom, I had stopped being able to produce milk for my newborn child, and then the guilt that came on top of that,
Yep.
because then it became now, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of course, we're in America. He's not starving, but that's what guilt will do. That's what trauma will do.
Yep.
It will just massage things to make it the worst possible. And I'm choosing to share this to say it's not a unique story because I've heard it from other moms. I've heard it from other moms. So I think what we're saying is until we can acknowledge and be at peace with the fact that we're not okay, we can't do all the things that we're running around trying to do.
And that if and not in the most present, available, quote unquote effective way that we can. And that it's actually okay to live in, you know, we're doing the best that we can, and that our best is not enough, and that it will miss the mark. Um, because we're in this very, very, I don't even know if there's words to put to it, but this very just horrific uh, situation. I don't know what else to call it. We're living a very real life that doesn't allow for us to take a break, but that we have to force taking a break. We have to force rest because this life is not gonna allow that. Right? It's not.
So the rest and the peace, however you need to get it, is part of advocacy, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely, and that we can't forget what we already know we do as a people to rest, to advocate, to be well. It just can't look the way we would like it to, and that's okay.
Hmm. Absolutely. That's okay. And I want to throw in there to commune with our creator again.
Absolutely.
We, we can't let them take that away. I'm more convinced than ever that genocide is with, taking away on all levels. And
Good.
I hear it said in American culture, in Western spheres, joy is a form of rebellion. joy is a form of rebellion, right? Joy
Hmm.
is a form. So I can't help but think that keeping our connection with our spirituality is also a part of our rebellion, a part of our advocacy, a part of our well-being. So
Yeah.
whatever that is to us, let's not forget that part. So before we log off for today, and I want to kind of put you on the hook for a part two of this conversation. Can we do that?
I'm down. Yeah.
Okay. You're not just saying it because you're on the spot and there are people watching.
No,
Okay, good.
not at all.
Because this
Not at
is
all.
such a
I'm
positive
down.
conversation,
Yeah.
and very much so important to hear it right from a Tigrayan man. You know,
Yeah.
that's how it feels to me. Um,
Yeah. And and
that's how it
and
feels.
my family has an experience. I was on that walk with my mom multiple times. I have two siblings that were born in Sudan. Um, so
So
you
we were
know,
talking about you.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and we're talking about me and the part of me that still continues to figure out how to be well, because that's an experience that will never leave,
that's
uh,
right.
because it's happened on the outside to me, it's happened to my mother and even my siblings on the outside, but it's happened to me and it happens to me on the inside. So there are triggers that happen with things like this. So this is professional, but it's also very, very personal.
There's a Shakespearean line somewhere. It says "entered in their bones." It's something that has entered into our bones.
Yep.
You know, that generational stuff that we hear about, we talk about. I want to close out talking about ways to ground ourselves in the
Mm.
present when we feel lofty, when we feel stressed, when we're feeling this post-traumatic stress where we're triggered, what we talked about, things that nudge this trauma and resolve trauma, and you start
Yeah.
feeling like you're not breathing, you're not, let's put out there some things that we can do, physical things, mental things. What can we do? And why don't you guys share with us also in the chat, what are some of the things that you do while we talk about what people can do? They'll do.
And this is a very hard one. Don't take what's happening to that other person that you're sitting with, in front of, on the phone with, personal, right? There's a healthy level of, in order to listen, you have to step back a little bit. So not taking negative emotions or outbursts personal, or to the heart is what I would say. Um, and again, that's a hard one because what's happening here is personal, you know, which is the trick. And again, I believe that things can live together. So as much as I say, do your best to step back and not take personal these negative emotions. I'm also saying it's okay to step in and hold emotions for our people, but remember how to recover for yourself so that you can do it again. Um,
Yeah, that's a good one. I direct that especially to this conversation that's happening in the chats about social media advocacy, because that's where we get caught up really.
yeah,
And some people are talking about getting kicked off of Twitter being one of the main forms of advocacy currently. And that is why a lot of accounts are suspended, because this is real. This is something that's really happening
there,
to you, to your people, and so you can't help but get triggered. And then that now you are at a back and forth, and you say something, and then that person reports you to Twitter safety, and now your account is blocked, and now you're having trauma because you feel like you've been silenced, or people have been silenced. So there's that full circle that comes just from trying to do something For Sahay, before we move on from this, I want to remind you there are other forms of advocacy.
Mm.
And I've noticed that part of mental health, good mental health, part of taking care of ourselves is being informed, because what we don't understand it really scares us, and that gets into that dark side of our imagination. But also, part of mental health is finding your niche. And it, although it takes a lot of us to do these campaigns, if you are consistently being suspended, and I know quite a few members of my family who are facing that, and it causes them such anxiety, then let's find a different way.
Mm.
Because right now, also, what we're doing as a community is, and that is actually why I've been away from wellness in time of crisis. We are speaking to every possible congressperson, senator. This is something that every community does and needs to do. And so please reach out to me. HPN for Tigrayan Advocacy Group, which I'm involved with as well. That is our um, commitment to our community, is being your one-stop shop for helping you connect with your representatives and helping you facilitate that conversation. So there's so many different forms.
Right.
I think it's needless to say that we finding a positive way to advocate also helps us take care of ourselves. We were,
I think.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I just want to, you know, I think it's important to put in real life the words and actions that need to happen or can happen for us, with the understanding that discomfort may not be taken away. So, the other thing that I think we need to rely on and remember, and I know this might sound funny, is rest and food in our community is huge for times of recovery. Why do we think it is that, for example, symbolically, food and shelter and rest has been taken away from our people? Because that's what brings us joy. That's what fills us at a basic level. So, what I would tell our folks is, here in the States, monitor your rest, monitor your eating, monitor how much you're hydrating yourself. Because again, when survival kicks in, especially here in the States, those are the things that automatically start decreasing. And then they cause us to not be available. So I would put that in play. I would also put in play, as tricky as this may be, and it's hard, is remember that you're safe. I know that's a hard one to understand, but in order to help our people, you have to remember that you're safe. Um, we have to be able to healthily remove ourselves, because there's no way all of us can get to our hometowns now. We have to be able to remove ourselves and say that we're safe, and that is unsafe as our people are back home, that they're doing their best to take care of themselves. Um, and as hard as this may sound, and there's truth here, and it's still a mark that's missed, the global community is missing the mark and still doing its best to figure out how to connect here. And it's still missing the mark. So remember, you're safe, which is a part of self-care. Again, um, platforms like what's happening here with you and I, Helena, this idea of let's educate and inform our people so that we can make like wiser, reasonable decisions. That's important. Tune in to what HPN is doing, and the many other organizations are doing here, so that we can come back to some kind of like healthy medium, because there is a lot of information being placed out all the time. So, you know, in the same breath, I would also say learn how to and recognize when you need to tune out, that it is okay to tune out. It is okay to step back, because living in a world that's always requires us to be in tune is a challenge here. You know, and we're not going through anything easy as a people here in the States. Although our experience are completely different than back home, but our people back home are living a real life. Um,
That's right. That's right.
we do our best. Um, don't forget that we've recovered before, and that in a time of crisis, it doesn't mean that we forget that or that we have to change how that looks for this time. Um, this is real. I don't know what else to say about it. It's just real.
I think that says it. That says it all. Rest, understanding that this is a real time in history. Sustenance,
Hmm.
reaching out and finding these conversations like the one we have had today, which exist within our communities. And we ask you to please reach out. We are putting a resource section at hpnfortigray.org where you will be able to find community members that are having these conversations. And of course, you could reach out to us as well, and we're happy to connect you. Or guess what? You can actually start a conversation yourself. Maybe it's something within your own city or state. Maybe it's something within your church or place of worship. It could be a Zoom link because of COVID. That's one good thing that came out of COVID. We've gotten closer from across the nations. You know, something about hearing somebody's voice that knows what you're talking about. And then in terms of physical things that we could do, I think about, of course, you mentioned again rest and sustenance, um, the breathing. You know,
Hmm.
as soon as you realize, maybe say, "Am I breathing right now?" I know it sounds silly, but it really isn't because a lot of times you'll find you probably are breathing very shallowly or maybe not breathing at all.
Yeah.
There's an exercise also where you close your eyes and you could be sitting or standing and um, you start at the bottom of your feet, um, recognizing um, what your feet is feeling and slowly coming up towards your head as in you feel your bones sitting on the chair, you feel your back straightening up, you feel your arms touching the arm seat, basically breathing and feeling yourself physically here. So sort of physically rooting your your body to the place and understanding the time that you're in. And sometimes I even say to myself, I'm safe. I'm safe.
Yep.
Sometimes I say, all is well when I find my heartbeat, all is well. And we live in an age of technology. So, you guys, really, it's really incredibly easy to go to YouTube and say, I know, it sounds, but they're all within our fingertips. You know
Yep.
what I like to do, Gide?
Yep.
Some evenings when everybody's calmed down at the house, I go to YouTube and I put in "All Is Well" guided meditation,
Yep.
and I just close my ears. And there's this woman that usually just pops up, and she just says things like, "All is well,
Huh.
all is well," and I just breathe as she tells me, "All is well." Like, sometimes we just need to get out of our heads. So
Yep.
whatever it looks like for you, whatever works. This might be one of the longer programs we've had. This has been such a wonderful conversation, Gide. I thank you so much on behalf of our listeners, our viewers. For myself, I'm going to. I feel bad. I don't want to even close out, but I want to honor your time. I promised you an hour, and we're coming upon an
All
hour
good.
and 20. But I just want to quickly read off some of the situations that's happening in the text here.
No.
Meditation, taking a walk, swimming, all help me. Thank you so much, Zaman. Thank you, brother and sister Helena, brother Gide. It was insightful discussion. Thank you, Yana. Thank you so much for that. Peace for all. Well said. That's also in the comments. I personally use it to fuel me, to put everything I have to rebuild Tigray better, stronger. My redemption, manner of speaking, lay in a better tomorrow for the next generation of Tigrayans. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And that's why we want to continue to advocate. You take care of yourselves, we take care of ourselves so that we can be there in full force. Perfectly said. Thank you for the advice. Yes, we have to be healthy in order to heal and help ourselves. That's the consensus here. Thank you all so very much for joining us. Any last words for this conversation today?
Just that we can't forget, we've been here before, although the experience is very different. We've been here before, and that it is okay to reach out for the things that did work for us before and that are working for us now. And just a reminder that just whatever we don't speak about. We've thrown the word conversation around a lot, but it is a very real thing. Whatever we don't speak about lives inside of us, and again, it comes out physically, and we all have a choice about how that goes. But let's continue to put words to what's happening here, in whatever format that is. Let's not forget that. That's what I would say.
Perfectly said. And for me, I just want to continue to remind you that you are loved, you are thought about, you are so important because you symbolize and signify the possibility of our people, the possibility to carry on. And like Gide said, we have been here before, and let's use the tools that have gotten us to today, because this day is our yesterday's tomorrow. And so we will have a tomorrow for today's ailments, and what happens today will be part of our history. And so let's continue to please check on each other, to be kind to ourselves, and to remember, as always, that God is with us. I mean, for me, it just boils down to there are no sides when it comes to God, that God is our refuge and our respite. If you don't see any other way, then please reach out to the one who's always there. And as always, I will close this conversation by reminding you that Tigray Sa'ariya, Tigray Sa'ariya, not Tigray Sa'ar. Thank you, and have a very blessed evening or afternoon. We will see you for our next conversation in wellness in time of crisis. Thank you so much, Gide Naza. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see you at HPN meeting.
Yes.
Thank you all.